hear why people were so drawn to Fighting Bob Follette. This is some rare film footage from 1924. It's the first sound film recording made on the Capitol steps in Washington.
Mere passive citizenship is not enough. Men must be aggressive for what is right if government is to be saved from those who are aggressive for what is wrong.
My grandfather was one of the greatest orators in
Fighting Bob Follette, old Robert de la Follette. So Robert de la Follette, who is this man? He ran against Woodrow Wilson, got respect from Woodrow Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson isn't going to throw him in jail like he did to Eugene Debs. Robert de la Follette, he went up against Woodrow Wilson on his Palmer raids, the Espionage Act, the amnesty for Eugene Debs, World War I. He was opposed to the draft. Eugene Debs is going to give a speech opposing World War I, and he's going to go to jail for it because it goes against the law. What was it, the Espionage Act or something? So it goes against the law. Eugene Debs goes to jail just for speaking. Now, Robert de la Follette, he's a senator, and he's just like Eugene Debs, except for he's a progressive. Eugene Debs is a socialist. And he was a political prisoner, and he wanted amnesty for him. So he's opposed to Woodrow Wilson's draft, opposed to Woodrow Wilson's Palmer raids, which went after socialists. It was the first Red Scare. And he was opposed to the Espionage Act, which is what Snowden is being drawn up on. So he also denounced U.S. interference in the Russian Civil War. He was totally on the side of the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution. Afterwards, however, he distanced himself from the communists. He said he's a progressive, which means that's not a communist. Being a progressive is not a communist. He was opposed to class government. He said he was opposed to a dictatorship of the proletariat and a dictatorship of the plutocracy. He was opposed to all dictatorships. He was for democracy. Fighting Bob Follette, he got his comeuppance as a governor of Wisconsin. He was a U.S. Senator, also was a House Representative. The governor of Wisconsin, he started his political career. 1891, U.S. Senator Follette Sawyer had offered a bribe to Fighting Bob Follette to fix a court case. And that just outraged him, and he needed to fix what was wrong with America. He ran for Wisconsin governor both 1896 and 1898, winning in 1900. So now, Fighting Bob Follette's the Wisconsin governor. What did he do as governor? Well, he had a railroad commission to regulate the railroads. He had an anti-lobbying bill to regulate the lobbyists. He changed the caucus vote in Wisconsin to direct democracy because he said that the caucus opened up too much corruption. He also had a civil service act. So you had to have merit. You couldn't just be hired based upon your political connections. You had to be hired on merit. Fighting Bob. What didn't Fighting Bob do? My God, all the things that he did. He was a Republican his entire life. 1924, he's going to run as a Republican or as a progressive against both Calvin Coolidge and that damn John W. Davis. John W. Davis. What do you believe? Everything Calvin Coolidge does? Oh, okay, so you're a conservative Democrat. John W. Davis is going to take the solid South, a deep Confederate South, which is crazy because John W. Davis is the only one that called for the banning of the KKK. And the KKK just kept coming back up every time. 1924, the KKK just kept coming. Calvin Coolidge is going to win 54% to Fighting Bob 17%. John W. Davis is 29%. And they try to make it sound like Mr. Beat. He's wrong. He says Robert de la Follette was a spoiler. How can he be a spoiler when you add Bob, La Follette 17% to John W. Davis's 29%? You get 46%. That's less than 54%. So even if Fighting Bob wasn't in there and you took all 17% and gave it to John W. Davis, the Democrat still doesn't win. They want to keep Calvin Coolidge, old Silent Cal. When America looked at Silent Cal, the douchebag, they said, yep, that's my guy. That's who represents me the best. As a Wisconsin governor's, he won the governor's chair. He also introduced roll call a roll call vote, so a railroad commission, anti-lobbying bill, direct democracy vote, Civil Service Act, and a roll call vote. Roll call vote, and he also used political science guys from college to draft up a flurry of legislation, which is smart. What's the point of political science in college if you're not going to... He was in favor of a wealth tax. He was in favor of public ownership of water. He really hated monopolies. He thought that courts could resolve labor disputes. He was in favor of the 16th Amendment, the Income Tax Amendment. He was in favor of the 17th Amendment, direct election of U.S. senators. So all about that democracy. Getting the primary for Wisconsin, getting the direct election for the U.S. senator via the 17th Amendment. He won the governor's chair in 1900, and he goes to be U.S. senator in 1906. He was known as being pro-environment, protecting unions, being a trust buster. Everybody was a trust buster back in the 1900s. Even William Howard Taft was a trust buster. The socialists had supported Fighting Bob's campaign in 1924. He wanted cheap credit for farmers. He also wanted to outlaw child labor. He wanted an end to U.S. imperialism in Latin America. Fighting Bob LaFollette was on the cover of Time magazine December 3rd, 1923. He rejected the League of Nations. He only wanted, he says that the League of Nations was just a bunch of moneyed interest. A bunch of moneyed interest. They're going to protect the elites and then moneyed interest around the world. That's all the League of Nations was going to do. He was opposed to World War I. He was only one of 6 senators to vote against the war with Germany during World War I. And World War I was devastating. It was trench warfare. It was a waste of blood, waste of treasure. That's why Harding's going to get elected. Return to normalcy. God damn, this crazy fucking world war business. What the hell's going on? Primary elections, caucuses, money power. He says the caucuses allowed the money power. Or no, World War I, he says that the reason why we got into World War I was because of the money power and the media puppets. So the rich people and then the media who just regurgitated, just echoed, just rubber stamped all the words of the money power. So interesting how that's similar and true to today. Let's see, no class government. He was an anti-communist, essentially. He's a progressive, so he's not a communist. He was in favor of Social Security. In 1924, with his progressive campaign, he wanted to bring the farmers and the working class together. And there you go. There you go. That's basically Robert de la Follette. He won Wisconsin. He got second place with like 11 different states. He actually probably the most strongest showing of a third party. I mean, besides, Abraham Lincoln, which won. And it was all Whigs and Federalists, so the Democrats came up somehow. But 17%, he even won a state. He won a state. That's because he won a state with the Electoral College, he actually could have won the presidency. But I don't know if he knew the Constitution well enough in order to do that. And listen to this. Outlaw child labor. What? Get rid of the Palmer raids, Red Scare, the Espionage Act, the amnesty for Eugene. You're allowed to talk in America. You're allowed to speak. Wealth tax, public ownership of water. Seems like it's common sense, to be honest with you. So there you go. He's born in 1855, died in 1925, but he's still in our hearts in 2022. He exposed Hardin's Teapot Dome scandal. He was violently against World War I, or virulently against World War I. Apparently, he talked about racial equality. He talked about getting women the right to vote. He talked a good game. But Calvin Coolidge won the presidency in 1924, and then Fighting Bob is going to have a bad heart, die the very next year. And then that's it. And that's all she wrote. Oh, Fighting Bob LaFollette, you were good in some things and not so great in others. Oh, Bob LaFollette, you've been a better president than Woodrow Wilson.
Political history of this country. and he would make a speech in the town square with thousands of people. He'd talk for 2 or 3 hours at a time.
During his election campaigns, Bob La Follette would give speeches 15 hours a day, every day, for 2 months straight. He was born and raised on a farm in Dane County, earned his degrees at the UW, and was first elected to office in 1880 as Dane County District Attorney. After that, he served in Congress for 3 terms, then lost re-election. It was then that a state Republican leader and a lumber baron from northern Wisconsin, Follette Sawyer, offered him a bribe to fix a court case against several former state officials.
I guess that was common procedure in those days, but